Well, I'm going to get us started. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us today. We are really excited about this conversation. We loved Ellen Kelsey's first book, or not first book, but most recent book, Hope Matters. And now this is her new book that is going to be the basis for really an informal conversation about the practice of hope. My name is Michelle Andrews, and I am one of the co-founders and the executive director of doornumber1.org. And we have been around for about 5 years now, and we have adopted this idea of evidence-based hope from the outset of all of our work that we do. So we're really, really thrilled. Ellen has become a friend and an advisor and a mentor and a really an inspiration for our work. So we're really thrilled to be in this conversation with her today. I want to start by doing an acknowledgement of the land upon which we are all standing or sitting and living, learning, and playing. And this is actually not where I live, but I have had the real pleasure of being in the west of what we call Canada today a couple of times this fall. And so this is Mill Bay on Vancouver Island. And it's the home to many, the territories of many Indigenous peoples, including those that I've listed here, the Malahat, the Hul'qumi'num Treaty Group, the Walla Walla, um, just in that one spot. And I have this picture that I just took, one of the countless breathtaking views you have from that part of the world. And then on the right, I'm showing you nativeland.ca and a screenshot of this same territory on this map. So anyone anywhere in the world can use nativeland.ca to figure out what native peoples might have been on the land before them and what languages are spoken and what treaties, if any, are in place. So I invite you to check that out. But I also appreciate the beautiful tapestry that they've tried to sort of demonstrate or show on this map on nativeland.ca, and just to think about all the wisdom, all the learning that we can bring to each other from all over the world as we connect in this important work. And to know that so many of these Indigenous peoples continue to this day living on and stewarding this land and supporting us to unlearn and relearn some ways that will help us bring more sort of health and harmony to our world. So that's I just want to express some extra gratitude. I have heard from in a couple of conferences and school visits that I've had, I don't know, maybe a dozen Indigenous elders and scholars just in the last few weeks. And it's really enriched my fall and my experience of kicking off this school year. So I am here with gratitude as a settler and really want to continue my own learning. And so I thought I would start in that way for us. So, what I'd like to invite all of you to do is to introduce yourselves in the chat. I wish we had time to introduce everyone the other way, but we don't. So, in the chat, please put your hello, where you're coming from, what school or organization, where in the world, what land you come from, and if you do know them, please also list the Indigenous nations that are connected to your land in the chat, and we will all enjoy seeing who's here and connecting the way we are. Okay, so before we dive into the main event, I just want to give a little sneak preview on something that all of you can connect with, I hope, in the days to come, in the weeks and months to come, actually. So we are partnering with an organization called Mad Courses, which does this thing called docathons. And one of the things that we think is really important is telling the stories that matter, and the idea that stories can move people. And that's what we're going to do here today in this conversation. And I wanted to just preview the fact that we're going to be doing this coming soon. So this is going to be another few weeks before all the details are in the works and sorted out, but it'll be on this webpage, which is kind of a holding place at the moment for this information. So check back with us, get on our mailing list, and we will share the information about how we're going to support students to tell their stories in short films and to really share those stories globally and locally. Okay, so I'm going to stop sharing for actually just a moment. And I want to introduce the folks that are here to have this conversation with us. So I have my colleague, Barb McIntosh from Door Number One, who is right there. She's been with us from the beginning in CAP, or nearly the very beginning in CAP. And so she's going to be helping us to watch the chat for questions and monitor how things are going. And then we have Kathleen Dawson, who is a middle school teacher at Georgetown Day School in Washington, D.C. She is at the heart of a place where I feel like hope is an important conversation. And she's also a big fan. So we invited her to be part of this conversation. Georgetown Day School is in year 2 of our Climate Action Accelerator Program. And I know that Ellen's first book played a big role in their journey. And maybe Kathleen, you can share a bit about that when you get to talk in a moment. And then Maddie and Bella are at Crofton House School in Vancouver. Maddie is in grade 10 and Bella is in grade 11. And they are students. We wanted to have a student voice here. And for all the other students that are here, welcome. And we will especially be looking for your questions and your voice as this conversation rolls forward. And then Ellen Kelsey. So you probably have all come because you already know a little or maybe a lot about Ellen Kelsey. She is an author, she's a provocateur, she's a thought leader, she's a researcher, she's a marine biologist, and she's the author of this new book, Hope Matters. How to be hopeful, overcoming despair and empowering practices to overcome despair and act for climate justice. So when I discovered that this book was happening, I said, Ellen, can we do a launch? And so I am really, really thrilled, Ellen, to have you here with us today for this conversation. Let me just also say a bit about how we're going to handle this. So the people that are spotlighted on your screen, we're the ones that are going to sort of start the conversation and be interacting together. And then at about the half-hour mark, we're going to open it up for others to um, speak and ask questions and sort of get into the conversation all together. So we'll get it started, warm it all up, and then we'll open it up. If you want to put questions in the chat in the meantime, you're welcome to, or you just hold on to them until that time. And we did get a few questions in advance, which we'll try to weave in as we go. Any other logistics that I missed, folks? I think we're good. Okay, if you have questions that are just logistics wise, put in the chat. We are recording this. We will share it out far and wide as well. So thank you so much for coming all. And I'm going to kick us off with this quote from Ellen's book. Which is, it's actually a quote out of a practice. So Ellen has all kinds of practical tips and tools, and I'm sure we'll get into them. But this one really spoke to me, which is the idea is actually to host an event, a party, a potluck, something, and ask this question. We're asked people to bring stories that have this question attached. So what has changed for the better? And so Ellen tells us that focusing on success is empowering and it's respectful of the competence and the progress that we've all made, and also the respect for our more than human kin who are always filling vacuums and addressing problems that we may have created as humans. And so I love that idea actually of respect. And then something else about this practice is that it's this idea that we need not adopt a worldview that tells us we should be afraid, we should be worried, we should be scared, that everything is falling apart. That we have a choice on what worldview we take on, and so that's whether it's about resilience or about progress, the potential for a beautiful, thriving world. Um, it's part of a practice that I've adopted, and I feel like it's really served me. And along with this idea that the more you know, the more empowered you feel and the more you can make change. So I'm going to kick that off and turn it over to Ellen to maybe speak to this and to speak to the group and just take it from there.
Oh, thank you so much, Michelle. And thank you, everyone. Michelle, did you want to put it back on Spotlight? Are you comfortable that way, or how would you like to handle
Oh
that?
yes, of course. I'm sorry. I will stop
Yeah,
sharing.
no worries. No worries. We're in it
All right.
together.
So that
That's the whole thing.
everybody, you can see the
Yes.
conversation and everyone else as well, I hope now.
Yeah, thank you
Great.
so much. And thank you, Michelle and Door Number One, for pulling us all together in this way. It's super generous hearted. And it's part of a conversation of hope that we've been having now together through the CAP schools and beyond for a number of years now. So it's really exciting to me to think about how we continue to infuse a culture of hope. Because one of the things I know about hope I'm a very lucky person. I get to speak with people of many different ages in lots of different places. And often people will take on the idea, I can get on side with the idea that approaching something from a hopeful perspective is powerful, but it's really hard to hold on to that as an individual. And I think the reason it's so hard to hold on to it is because we live within a very broad, I would say, global narrative of doomism, in which we hear an awful lot about what's broken and almost nothing about what's moving us in the directions we need more of. And there are environmental journalists, for example, researchers who study environmental journalism, who tell us that less than 3% of all we hear about climate change, as one example, even mentions a solution. So we are constantly hearing about, it's important to know what's broken, but when we only hear about that, it's very disempowering. And so the reason I wrote this book is that after I wrote Hope Matters, many people said to me, well, how do you actually do that? How do you choose to be hopeful? Like how does hope happen for you? And I came to realize it for me, hope is absolutely a choice. It's something I'm choosing to do no matter what. And I want to underscore that because I think perhaps before I really thought about it, I might have thought, and many people will say to me, well, I feel hopeful if I can see something's going well, but if it's not going well, I don't feel hopeful, as if it's a response. What I've come to believe is it's a choice. So because I'm choosing to be hopeful, no matter what is happening, no matter how worried I am about it, no matter how angry I am about it, no matter how wrong it is, I'm choosing to look at it from a hopeful perspective. And that does a lot of things. It causes me to go looking for where are others making strides in this thing that I really care about. And when I do that as an ongoing way of approaching the world, so choosing to be hopeful and then going and looking, it's kind of astonishing what happens. Because what happens is you end up seeing, oh, this is happening over here, this is happening over here, this is happening over here. And that both empowers me and also allows me to to become part of that which is having the most positive influence on the thing that I really care the most about. And so it changes, in fact, how I end up feeling. And I end up feeling still really angry, but much more prideful, for example, of what people are actually doing or what other species are doing. And then that really infuses me. And we know from psychological literature that anger and hope are the two most activating emotions that we have as people. And so being able to choose to stay in that kind of very activating space is a very powerful way of approaching the world. And as Michelle said, the book is a series of stances. So, I'm How to Be Hopeful is a series of stances or positions, choices, and one of them is to choose to be hopeful. And then within it, there are practices such as the one of gathering people and just asking them, what in your life has actually changed for the better, especially something you thought would never change. Like you were really convinced it would never actually have changed for the better. And what do we learn when we look at those stories? And I was recently thrilled to find out back in 2014, I was part of a group that crowd shared and sourced at that time when Twitter was around ocean conservation stories of solutions and successes. That hashtag, which was hashtag ocean optimism, to all of our surprise, went viral. And so there are many, many, many examples. And researchers have gone back in the last few years and looked at, okay, if you look across all of those examples, what do you see as in common to the most successful ocean conservation stories? Things that actually have come to have a positive impact in the ocean. And what's common is networks, that when people work in networks together around a big issue, it's really powerful. And so, again, the more that we understand what works and share that, the more empowered position we're in to implement that. And that's why I think CAP schools are so vital. It's a network of people with a common interest in moving something forward. And sometimes those networks, have to pull on their strongest selves. At this point, this group can't speak about something. This group has lost its funding. This group's in a tense political circumstance. But collectively, we move the thing forward. And I think that's a really moving thing to me, and why I think choosing to be hopeful no matter what, and continuously choosing to stay up to date on what is most effective is a really powerful way to approach this highly sadly unjust world in which we find ourselves.
Ellen, So I just had a thought about an audience participation we could start just for this moment. If everybody
Yes.
wants to put in the chat a story that of something that has changed for the better, just speaking to this practice. What do you know of?
Be
Give us an
wonderful.
example. Wow, and
Yeah.
we're gonna keep the conversation going. But as you think of things that we could tell each other right now in this 1 hour we're spending together, what's giving you where have you seen something change for the better in the micro or in the macro on any
Exactly.
climate, social justice, anything?
Yeah. Anything.
Just throw it in the chat. That'll be fun to read.
Lovely.
Um,
Thanks, Michelle.
okay. So maybe I'll turn it over to Maddie to kick off a question that you might have for Ellen or a conversation starter, and just to keep this moving and from something you were thinking of before or something that's come up just in this conversation now.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Michelle. So, I'm wondering, Ellen, what inspired you to change the narrative and focus on having hope for our environment?
Ah, thanks, Maddie. And I should say, Maddie and I met 3 years ago. And, it's thrilling for me to be able to meet you yet again and know we're on the same quest together because I think intergenerational collaborations are essential in this work. We know that climate justice issues, for example, very much disproportionately influence youth and people in the global south and indigenous populations and communities. So it's really thrilling that you're here, Maddie. Um, yeah, the narrative, I was very lucky when I was a younger person. I did a lot of work in different countries and in not-for-profits and for-profits and academic settings. And I was constantly running into this common narrative of doom and gloom. So that, and I became fascinated by that. Lots of people who care deeply about something, we default to showing that we care by essentially reiterating how deeply broken something is. And so that became intriguing to me, like because I knew that was disempowering. So how do we handle this, sort of conflict between signaling that something really matters to us and talking about it in ways that actually cause us to be far less effective than we want to be about the thing that really matters to us? So really recognizing something as a narrative, like a story we tell each other, rather than seeing it as a factual truth. So really distinguishing between the two, because once you recognize that there absolutely are factual problems, no question, climate change is a massive problem. Social injustice is a massive global problem, no question. But how we talk about it, we have a lot of flexibility with. And so really teasing out, oh, the narrative is the challenge here. And if we can really look at that in different ways, then we can put ourselves in a position where we can do a lot more. And so then I went looking for others who study narratives and how do you change narratives and how do you understand narratives? How do you unlearn things? It's really hard to unlearn narratives because they're reinforced everywhere. The way we're taught, the way we teach, the way we speak, the way we confide in each other, the way the media talks to us, they are everywhere. So just recognizing and realizing, oh, part of my work as a hope activist is to disrupt the narrative of doom and gloom.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Great. Bella, do you have a question for Ellen right now or
I actually do have some follow-up questions that I was
yeah?
curious about. I was on your website and I was looking into your book, and I noticed that you mentioned about the importance of sourcing solution-focused news and tracking positive trends. And I was just wondering because often in the past when I've looked at the news, it's starting to get overwhelmingly like negative almost. And so I'm like curious, like what are some strategies you recommend that I can like stay informed while also like maintaining hope?
Such a beautiful question. Thank you. Yeah, in fact, the Reuters news agency has an academic arm, and they actually chart globally the rise of news avoidance. And that's all of us saying, like, I just can't take this anymore, and turning ourselves off of the news overall, because of being so heavily bathed in problem identification source news. And I am happy to say in the last 15 years or so, there's been a rise of a whole new field of journalism, which is called solutions journalism. There's a wonderful solutions journalism network. And if you go on my website, there's a list of the various organizations or sources of news that I follow on a daily basis that are in a solutions orientation. And what they're doing is saying, we're going to look just as rigorously at what's broken, but also rigorously at where our communities, countries, organizations, whoever, uh, making progress in that issue. And what's intriguing to me, the Solutions Journalism Network has these wonderful mentorships, or fellowships, which journalists can apply for. And the reason they set it up that way is it takes a little bit more time to report on solutions because solutions occur across people and across organizations, whereas problems you can kind of study as one journalist by yourself. And so I think that's really fascinating, even when we think about that, maybe in a school context, if we do projects on solutions, maybe we need a little more time because we need to be thinking across divisions or across individuals. So yeah, as a practice, you can take a look at my site, or it's listed in the book as well, or use keywords such as solutions or progress or things moving in good directions, any of those keywords. And you'll start to see some, like GRIST as a independent news organization has a number of solutions oriented streams that it does that you can download as a weekly newsletter. Reasons to be Cheerful is one I really like. David Byrne, the musician from Talking Heads, started it, and it's really thriving. Solutions Journalism Network. And as a practice, I sometimes ask students to do is to just decide for 10 days in a row, the first 20 minutes of your day that you'd normally be following the news or whenever you do it, look only at solutions-oriented sources for that first 20 minutes. And then just keep a little note to yourself. How did you feel? And how did you feel over the course of that 10 days? And it's really noticeable, the difference in how you end up feeling and also how action-oriented you become. Because instead of just feeling like, oh, I can't do anything about this enormous thing I'm hearing about, you're actually hearing about people doing something about it. And it becomes like, oh, I want to find out more about them and how are they doing it because I want to be part of that too.
Absolutely. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing that. I definitely think that that will allow students who shied away from the news to now engage with like positive news sources. Thank
Yeah, and there's, you're probably very familiar with Hope Core, which is emerging very much on TikTok, and looking at where does Hope Core fit with evidence-based solutions orientations, and is there a place there, perhaps for your own expression of that, bringing together that ethic of I'm going to stay in this hopeful place, and then bringing with it evidence of things that are moving in directions we need more of.
Absolutely. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I'm noticing people are putting their favorite stories, but also some
Wonderful.
sources of news in the chat. So thank you.
Thank you.
Keep that coming also. Kathleen, what did you want to pick up on?
Hey, thanks. First, excellent questions, Maddie and Bella. I am gonna piggyback on Bella's question, but I just wanted to take a second to say how much I appreciate and was impacted by Ellen's first book, Hope Matters: Why Changing the Way We Think is Critical for Solving the Climate Crisis. I have this board now in my room that was inspired by the book. So science, solving problems, and creating hope. And we add like kind of rotating stories with my students. We talk about them in class. I used to teach middle school. I teach first, second, and fourth grade now. And it has really improved my eco-anxiety to be teaching kids about hope and looking for hope. And so today, for example, like I try to do in each grade. So second grade, we're talking about amphibians. So we watched a video about this newt brigade in California that goes out and helps the salamanders like cross the street when they're all like going to mate. And so these people that are out there helping, I've really tried to start pointing out the helpers. So my fourth grade unit, when we learn about climate change, like the last 5 minutes of every class is pointing out the helpers and awesome things that people are doing. They do a project where they present on renewable energies, and I give them news sources so they can look up hopeful news and share it in their presentation. And it's just like, it's really changed the way that I look at and think about things. And I even have a group text with friends called the Climate Positivity Group. We like send each other news. So it's really helped me in so many ways. So I just wanted to say thank you because it's been awesome. And then I think, so I had written this down and Bella, I think, touched on part of this. I'm wondering, and in your answer where you were talking about strategies for keeping hope and the 10 days in a row looking at solutions-based news, I was wondering if you have any like daily rituals that kind of help you get in this mindset. I feel like especially maybe recently with the UN talk and like encouraging countries to stop working towards climate solutions, I felt really, I feel like I took a big slide backwards as far as how I was feeling hopeful. And so, and I do, again, like today made me feel better teaching kids about it, but I'm wondering if you have maybe besides the 20 minutes like of looking at solutions-based news, if you have any other, and if not daily, but common rituals that you do to practice maybe.
Yeah. Oh, Kathleen, I really appreciate everything you said. And um, sorry, I'm just writing myself two quick notes because I've noticed more and more in my life, I get so moved by people and what they're doing that I'm sort of just sitting there with a mass of feelings, and I want to make sure I can still speak. Thank you for all your work and what you're doing to create cultures of hope with your students and your colleagues and the networks that you're using. And so a couple of things that I do that I might be helpful to you. One of the stances in the book is I am emotional. And I think really just in that same way saying, I choose hope, I reject fatalism, I am emotional. Those feelings you're having are because you love something, and you're really worried and you care about it. Those are beautiful feelings. They mean that this means something to you. And I think rather than feeling like hope is something, we have to stay cheerful or good-natured, or that, to me, that's toxic positivity. Hope can sit right alongside. I am deeply, deeply worried, and one of the things I try to do as a practice for myself is I try to stay in fear. Like if I'm really afraid of something and there's lots of good reasons for me to be afraid, I just try to stay in the fear rather than going to fatalism. Because in
Okay.
fatalism, we say, I can see where this is going, it's going here. And once I fatalistically determined the end point, there's not much I can do about it. It's already happening if I were to say it. Whereas if I'm brave enough to stay in my fear and say, I am super afraid based on all this good reason, but I'm going to stay in the fear and I'm not allowing myself to go there, then I still have a ton of agency. And I want to stay agentic around the things that I care enough about that I am so worried about. So staying in the fear, it sounds bizarre, but it's really powerful. Accepting whatever emotions I'm having and giving myself time to have them. So if I'm really overwhelmed by something, I know there's lots of other people working on something, and I will give myself a gentle day, and be with the trees and just feel whatever I'm feeling. So I am emotional. And then the other practice I do, you gave the example of the UN. I think the way in which we experience news kind of keeps positioning it as if there is some ultimate one thing that can tip us over into the worst place we could ever be. And I actively fight against that by looking at many different levels of government all the time, many different organizations, many different sectors, many different topics, and keeping my mind around the fact that this global ecosystem of other species is hugely diverse, as is our human systems hugely diverse. So I know mayors, for example, of cities have been extremely powerful in the climate sphere and are being extremely powerful in the political sphere right now in the US. So I'm looking at mayors, I'm looking at the UN, I'm looking at countries, I'm looking at corporations, I'm looking at not-for-profit. And the more you do that, you constantly will see areas where there's tremendous progress being made, rather than allowing, which I think is a normal thing that happens, the headline to then make you think, oh, this ultimate one thing is the final worst thing.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
You're
That makes a lot
welcome.
of sense.
And I will just say, Michelle very kindly had said it would be great if you were all in the sun or all in the shade. And I'm just loving the fact the sun is refusing to follow that agenda. So I'm in and out of it as it's moving through this beautiful sky.
Yeah, we shouldn't be running from the sun. And if we have time at the end, I'm going to show a video that has that as a theme. Okay, well, let's see what other questions are bubbling up. I'm looking through the ones we got. You've addressed many of the ones I think that we've received. Barb, what do you think?
Yeah, I noticed Jackson and his team sort of posed that question, how can we use this mindset of keeping hope for the future in every aspect of life, not
Mm.
just the environment? And I'm wondering, Jackson, if that's maybe been addressed a little bit, but if you had any other sort of comment or question on that along that line, given that that's really what we've been talking about.
No, I think that was great. That was a wonderful job. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Thank you. One of the things I find really helpful too as a practice is to resist this starting line fallacy. So in the way in which we talk about these issues, there's a real tendency for us to say, if we do such and such, then this could get better. But when we're doing that, we're subtly reinforcing the idea that all the hard work lies ahead of us. And I think it can be so powerful to say, because people have been doing all of these things and other species have been doing all these things, we're now here and we want to build on that to get to the next place. So we're not at the starting line by any means. Kathleen, you mentioned renewables with your students. Um, Whenever I do presentations, I'm really interested in checking my expiry date. That's another practice I have. I just keep going and looking for the expiry dates on things I'm really concerned about. Am I still up to date? Has this thing changed? And in terms of renewables, it's one that's constantly changing. I think now we're at 40% of global electricity is produced by renewables. We weren't anywhere close to that even, not that long ago. The same thing when I'm looking at marine protected areas, that's one that's constantly moving in the directions we need more of. And so even when we see backsliding, we can see the trend is moving in that direction. And then we can say, okay, how is that happening? What is it that's helping us to get there? So really challenging the starting line fallacy by changing our language to acknowledge that which is, when you were using, Kathleen, the beautiful example of helpers, those helpers helping the newts, I love that, really made me think about, we've got such awareness now of how important it is to join up spaces, right? Wildlife corridors or those kinds of ideas. And the new bridge being built in Los Angeles across the highway, which is another helpers, right, of how those species move across an enormous highway, and was partially inspired by the 90 some bridges and underpasses that go now through the Rocky Mountain National Parks in Canada. And so I think when we see the people with the signs and the newts, we can be inspired, but we can do this thing which we really want to work against, which is to say, it's one tiny thing. But actually, they're part of this much bigger, much more powerful movement, which is to join up spaces and make it possible for species to move. And then species, of course, themselves are such incredible healers at filling in spaces. We can even look at spaces within our own communities that have been rejoined up. When there's been a pause in human activity, we really see, the trees filling in, the other species filling in, mycelium networks at work.
Maddie and Bella, do either of you have another question for Ellen? And if you don't, I have one, but you go ahead if you've got one. You're muted, so.
Yeah, I think you can continue on, Michelle, if you want.
Okay, all right, great, no problem. Well, and there's one that it's come up in a way in the chat, but also there's a question that came in advance. And it's about how do we deal with people that are especially negative and especially feeling fatalistic. Maybe they don't want to have the conversation, but like hopeful is ridiculous at this point. Or and there's also this sense of people who feel like or maybe are oblivious to their privilege and are feeling like it's not about them. They don't need, I'll be fine, we'll be fine, even if, islands are drowning or people in an impoverished area are suffering or whatever. And it's not that people are maybe that clear about it, but this idea of privilege and this idea of fatalism, and they could be very separate strategies, but they've come up in the conversation and the
Yeah.
questions.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Yeah, lots in there. And I'm not sure if you can hear my dog barking at this moment. I have a practice in the book around trying to stay in equanimity around issues, and my dog constantly barking is my way of practicing staying in equanimity by speaking kindly to her when she barks. Um, so hopefully she's not too loud on this call. But yeah, I think one of the fascinating things and around cynicism is that we have. I'm always intrigued by researchers who study things that are so relevant. And it turns out that cynicism, when someone's being cynical, we actually socially judge them as smarter, because they seem like they're being so dismissive of something, they're of a higher intelligence. And I find that really fascinating because it then means if you're presenting as hopeful, you're presenting as less smart. So you're not only having to deal with doom and gloom, but you're having to deal with a social bias towards, you're just maybe really ill-informed, But that isn't true. And it turns out if you really look at that research, that to be a cynic is actually easy. You just have to say, kind of everything's wrecked, right? I don't believe anything. Whereas to be hopeful, you have to do the hard work of seeing where are, I'm taking that stance, but where are things moving in that direction that are better? And so it's actually proven that to be staying in a subject from an open-minded perspective is a lot more difficult to do. It takes more intelligence to do that. So I really appreciate that piece. And then I think the idea of when you see someone who's really apathetic, which a number of teachers asked me about. They said, my students are just not interested. They're apathetic. But we know that when you feel helpless and hopeless, and you just continuously hear about how broken something is, you really do shut down and tune out and look very apathetic. And I think part of the reason of saying, I am emotional as a stance is an invitation to explore the vast variety of ways we're feeling. Lots of work now in the field of climate emotions and climate emotions wheels, for example, that encourage us to say, oh, I'm feeling 6 of these things all at the same time. And that's causing me to present in a way that I may look really apathetic, but actually it's because I care so much and I'm just completely shut down. So I make the assumption when I'm dealing with someone who's either really fighting back or is whatever, that they probably have extremely strong feelings about this thing. And then what I try to do is make a safe space, creating safe space for those feelings, whatever they are. And then stay really engaged in my own unlearning of my own narratives and privileges, so that I can share back when the time is right, oh, I also thought this, or wow, I just caught myself that I keep being in this place, but I'm really trying to be in this place now. And so, for example, around privilege, I think I've really come to the belief that our identities, I don't get to say I love somebody unless I'm acting in a loving way. It's not a label I'm allowed to say. It's an action I have to keep doing. And I see the same thing for any form of privilege. I don't get to say I'm not racist unless I can look at my actions on a daily basis and say, did I act in a way that is, appropriate, both in what I chose to do or what I chose not to do, or who I stood in solidarity with, or who I whatever. And I think that shift from an identity as if it's a fixed thing to an identity, a label, which is something I am actively bringing into life at any given moment in my life, has been a really powerful way to check my own privilege and to therefore be, I hope, a little more authentic in my conversations around privilege.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Helen. Maybe just I know Ingrid was piping in, and along those same lines, it's that idea of, and certainly we know our friends in the South are feeling it, but even well, lots of different places when it becomes political and there's this all makes sense. And then is there another layer, or is it the same approach when it becomes that sort of political angle, whether it's with colleagues or family or friends in that regard. When a decision's made, it's announced, very publicly on news, and it gets you that it's not helpful, and it goes perhaps contrary to what we others know as with science, etc. I'm just wondering what's that approach there?
And before you
Yeah,
answer that,
yeah.
Ellen, I'm going to say after this, we're going to open it up to anyone else. Just raise your hand if you'd like to get in the queue to ask a question you've got, and we'll open up the mics and do it that way.
Thank you. Yeah, my own view is that everything is political. Whatever we're doing is based in values, and that's just how we are. We have differing values, we have differing ideas, and we know at the same time that we operate within huge systems of injustices, and we're really aware of the systemic undertones of those that exist, like the way in which capitalism operates, for example, creates incredible injustices. We know that. We know we are colonization is a huge force of injustice that we are operating in collectively in human societies. And so I think just really being aware of those systemic undertones. One of the stances in the book, there are 5. The 4th is that we're on a reparative quest. Because we are operating in systems of injustice, everything I'm doing is I recognize I'm on a reparative quest. I'm repairing something that needs repairing. And so that keeps me in that orientation of what's underlying this brokenness, and that whatever I'm engaged in is recognizing that. And then again, creating safe spaces to express emotions, and bringing forth, checking my expiry date. Okay, what is happening around this particular issue in these particular ways that I am able to move forward with? So, and part of the book talks about forgiveness. And it's a part that I really felt was necessary, because when we look at, there's some incredibly inspiring work being done all over the world, in every place around, really thinking about, for me personally, forgiveness is giving up on a past that I just really wish hadn't happened, an event that as long as I just am stuck that thing shouldn't have happened, and lots of times it shouldn't have happened. Forgiving something doesn't mean that you are saying that it isn't totally wrong. It's just saying, if I stay in that thing that's totally wrong, and I can't move past it, then I'm not in my most agentic self around this thing that really matters to me. And so I think it does involve a lot of deep work. To be hopeful involves a lot of deep work around calling out injustice as injustice, and at the same time finding those people or other species who inspire us with their capacity to continue on the thing that really matters. And so the stance of I'm on a reparative quest for me is powerful.
Thank you for that. My mind is going. Appleby, you have a question. Do you want to just speak it to Ellen? And maybe I'll take the spotlights off so we can just maybe see each other a little bit more easily now, okay?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming, Ellen. I would really love to know how, as students and teachers who are quite invested in fighting for a positive environment, sometimes when we get bad news or something that might not have worked the way we want, it's hard for us both to go and share this with our students. We were wondering if there was a way, or maybe you have a practice that can help us promote almost like relentless hope or perseverance with hope.
Oh, I love that. Relentless hope. That's a beautiful way of saying that. Oh, thank you. And hello to everyone at Appleby. I had such a wonderful time with students and staff there a few years ago. And thanks for your question. Yeah, again, I think it's just making hope a choice, that I'm choosing to hope no matter what. In that sense is relentless. I love that term. And so then I stay with that. And it just really does force me to continuously look for areas within the thing I care about that are moving in a better direction. And then there is very interesting work around social media sharing, for example, is sometimes easier for students to do in those ways when it does fall under, when you're using a channel that is is part of the schools channel or is part of an organization's, maybe it's the Climate Action Youth Network or those kinds of things. Sometimes that's easier than in your own personal channels, So finding ways that you can be part of a collective that is speaking in solidarity around an issue. Does that make sense?
All
Yeah,
right, who
and I
else?
agree with you. Sorry, I did just want to add, um, and I think it came up at the very beginning of this conversation, the idea of what do we do for those who are ill-informed or don't know. It's one of the things I follow on a regular basis and update pretty much every couple of days is that we are living on a planet where there's huge levels of concern around climate change. Like that the vast majority of people on Earth are very concerned about climate change. And so just knowing that is really a helpful thing to know. So that when you hear different things in the news, or this group has stopped, or that group has stopped, or whatever, I just continuously keep going back and looking. And you can look at polls on a global basis. You can look across different countries. You can look at different districts within a city in a particular country, and you will continuously see high levels of concern. So what Michael Mann, the climate scientist, says is our issue is no longer climate denial. That does occur, of course, within certain individuals, but the much bigger issue is climate doomism, and that people feel it's already too late or too large or too broken to be solved. And that isn't true. And so it becomes really necessary to keep ourselves in the most empowered stance to deal with the issues rather than falling into that doomist place.
Thank you. Hey, Scott, do you want to speak your question? It looks like I think there's a couple other related questions living in the group.
Sure. Thanks for this, Ellen. So I was just thinking about you had said earlier on that two of the most activating emotions are hope and anger, and I would say that in my life, anger has been my sort of go-to, my reflexive response to political issues, environmental issues, justice issues, like all through my life. And so I'm wondering we what your position is or your sense of how we harness anger productively and how we kind of weave anger and hope together.
Thanks, Scott. Thank you very much. And yeah, I mean, anger is a very understandable response to something that's unfair or wrong. I think it's a very powerful and important emotion. And when I write about anger in the book, and I'm happy to say there are different people who really inspired me in this book and appear in the book. Just trying to think of Misha's last name. Anyway, I apologize. I'll find it. But there is a person who studies anger and really gave me the thought that in the same way that I can think about love, like I have lots of kinds of love in my life, the love I feel for my dog, the love I feel for the planet, the love I feel for, my children. I have a lot of varieties of love. And she suggests there's a lot of varieties of anger. And I really like that, the idea that I can think of anger as many complex forms. And by doing that, then I feel I have a much larger, it's like having a bigger paint set. I have a much larger repertoire of ways in which I can decide on where I position myself around anger. And I have this thing within myself, and I try to make sure that it's everywhere in that book, is that whatever I'm suggesting has to operate at the level of global issues and intimate issues. So the way I'm conducting myself in my personal life and the way I'm conducting myself in this broader planetary way should be coherent, should be cohesive. And so for me, when we recognize the injustice of the world, that means that there is violence occurring all the time, in various different forms of which I'm very angry about. And so how do I stand in solidarity and make choices about, rather than thinking I have to suppress anger or present it only as one way, I have a much bigger repertoire of ways now that I can think about how do I want to exhibit or relate to my anger in this context, in this context, in this context.
Thank you for that.
Welcome.
Clayton, do you have something? Go ahead.
I do. I have a question. I wasn't seeing how to raise my hand here, so I raised my real hand.
Hi, Clayton.
Hi, thanks for being here. I guess I'm curious. One of the sort of tensions that I've been holding lately is um, around having. It seems to me like a lot of our current sort of sustainability, environmental actions and initiatives have the ultimate goal of trying to sustain a system which, quite frankly, is not sustainable.
Mhm.
And so I have a lot of hope that we are in the process of creating a new way of being and new economic systems and new social systems that reflect um, a more just world in a lot of ways. But I don't have a whole lot of hope that we can continue on the way that we have been for the last, 70, 80 years, maybe or longer. One of the things that I've been finding is challenging is that it feels like when I talk to people about a hope for a new way of being, that people can view that as a sort of doomism that our way of life will need to change drastically. And I think that that's probably true, to be honest. I think there's a lot of things we're going to need to learn how to let go of. And so I'm curious how you have, been able to come to terms with that, and how do you talk to people about a hope for really a radically new way of living without making it sound like we're going to be giving up things that we currently enjoy.
Thank you, Clayton. And I appreciate your question and your use of tensions. These are tensions I feel between
Mhm.
myself or between these ideas. And I think these are vastly complicated subjects, right? We're talking about the ways in which we've socially organized ourselves and the ways in which we move forward and are on a reparative quest around injustice, just as you said. So yeah, I think just the way you did it was absolutely beautiful. Here are these tensions I'm feeling. I'm thinking about this. One of the things I talk about in the book is the idea that capitalism is, economics as a system in which we organize ourselves is one thing. Capitalism is a particular form of economics that has been around, for this particular period of time. And we're seeing rises of degrowth economics, for example. So different ideas about organizing principles that are rooted with different assumptions not about infinite growth on a finite planet, which is where capitalism falls down for us. And so I think really being willing to look at the underlying systems and seeing each of them as choices of which people are actively engaged in challenging and emerging anew and finding different ways, to me is again of looking in directions we need more of. And for myself personally, I'm fascinated by degrowth economics and what that means and where that's at play and how that's emerging. What are those conversations about? Where are the tensions in amongst those advocating beyond capitalism? And I'm also super, super personally interested in um, beyond humans only. So really the rise of recognizing ourselves as multi-species entities and that we live in a multi-species planet. So I get excited when I think about, most of our modeling that we do for our climate change projections, for example, are in a human-centric orientation rather than recognizing we know this incredible resilience that exists in the world around us. And when we see how quickly whales are recovering, for example, humpback whales, every population, but a few are surpassing the recovery rates that we thought they would because they're social, highly intelligent animals. And as we've changed certain practices, made it much more possible for their resilience to appear. So I think I just try to open it up and rather than thinking of a scarcity mentality, right? We will lose. I try to say we live in an inherently abundant world. This is something Robin Wall Kimmerer speaks and writes about beautifully. Um, we're in an abundant world. And if we think about it as a complex and abundant world, then the changes we're moving towards are ones in which that abundance is better shared, better understood.
Great, thank you. I see Maddie and Bella have their hands raised. Go ahead.
Yeah, I also just want to follow up on when you mentioned about how students are expressing apathy, I was just wondering, like that was also something I noticed in my close circles around me. And so I was curious on how you see hope playing a role in inspiring them to engage in like action despite having these strong feelings.
Thank you. And I will say, 25% of, or sorry, 42% of the world is 25 years of age or younger. So we live on a planet that is mostly youth, as the largest demographic, I mean, and that's really important to know. And I will say that climate youth activism has been incredibly influenced by youth activism. And so it's not as if youth are not active, like very, very active. It's been youth who have driven the climate change agreement language to shift from climate change to climate justice, of really recognizing the injustices underneath it. And so I think it's around creating cultures in which hope is tied to something that is serious action around things that really matter, rather than being seen as, a position of a feeling, as if it's just like you're supposed to feel good about something like that. That's how hope is presented, and that's not at all what we're talking about. We're talking about evidence-based hope, examples of things, meaningful changes that are happening at big scales, and we're talking about really recognizing a culture of doomism that is created and put upon us by only hearing about problems in the media and too often in the way we learn.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
So, it is 1 minute to the hour. This time, this conversation just flew as I expected it would. So, I want to take this moment to thank Maddie and Bella for starting us off and queuing up some great questions. For Kathleen, also for being ready to start us off. Thank you to my colleague Barb for support. And Ellen, thank you so much once again for being part of our community and for bringing your insights and work and inspiration to all of us. Be well, everyone. We'll
Thank
share
you.
this out. Thank you for your participation in the chat, everyone. And I did put this video in the chat. Please watch it. Sarah Wall is a rock star from Rockaway Collegiate in Ontario, and she has got this incredible video with all of her students. The whole school is in there, I believe, one form or another. It is absolutely worth 3 minutes and 11 seconds of your time. So, and you'll find Ellen's first book in there if you're looking carefully. Any last
Thank you
words,
so
Ellen?
much. Just a huge thank you to you, Michelle, and to door number one for launching How to Be Hopeful. I really appreciate it. I can't imagine a better book launch. It's my great pleasure. And I also wanted to shout out to Kathleen's dad, Amos. It's really wonderful when a dad and a daughter share a passion of hope. So thank you for that.
Awesome. Wonderful. Thank you so much, everyone. I'll stay on for a minute if anybody has any last comments, but I recognize people have to go to their next thing, so feel free to do that.
Thanks, everyone. Have a great rest of the day.